18 human beings have died flying towards space. Every single one of them was brought home. This is the story of exactly how and what it actually took. Some were burned before they ever left the launch pad. Some were found still strapped into their seats, looking almost undisturbed. And one famous story about how a man died turns out to be completely invented. 5 disasters, 18 people. The honestly sourced story of their recovery, their myths, and where they rest today. Chapter 4 is the one Hollywood got the most wrong. We start at the very beginning, before a single rocket carrying this program's astronauts had even left the ground. Chapter 1. The tragedy before the first launch. January 27th, 1967. Astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee are sealed inside their Apollo capsule at Cape Kennedy, running a routine countdown rehearsal. The rocket underneath them isn't even fueled. The cabin is pressurized with almost pure oxygen. A spark somewhere in the wiring starts a fire, and in that atmosphere, it spreads almost instantly. The capsule's hatch opens inward in 3 sealed layers designed to be held shut by internal pressure. Once the fire raised that pressure, no one alive could have pulled it open. The pad crew worked for over 5 minutes to get the last hatch layer off. By the time they succeeded, the 3 astronauts were already gone. The official finding was death by asphyxiation from breathing in toxic gases. The burns came after. Investigators said unconsciousness would have come on rapidly. It took nearly 6 hours before their bodies could be recovered, since the heat had fused parts of their suits directly to the cabin. Air Force pathologists conducted the autopsies. The full reports have never been made public. Investigators traced the fire to a general area near a damaged wire bundle, but they could never conclusively identify the exact spark. Officially, the true ignition point may never be known. Grissom and Chaffee are buried at Arlington National Cemetery. White is buried at West Point, the academy he loved, at his own family's request. That was the cost of testing on the ground before a single astronaut in this program had even reached orbit. The next disaster came from the country racing hardest to beat it there. Chapter 2. The flight that never had a chance. April 23rd, 1967. Cosmonaut Vladimir Komarov launches alone aboard Soyuz 1, a brand new, rushed spacecraft that had failed its last unmanned tests. After a day fighting a crippled spacecraft, Komarov brings it down for re-entry. The main parachute fails to deploy properly, and the reserve chute tangles in the wreckage of the first. The descent module hits the ground at roughly 90 miles an hour and catches fire on impact. Komarov becomes the first human being to die during an actual spaceflight. You may have heard that a listening post overseas caught him screaming and cursing in his final minutes. That story comes from a single, unconfirmed source in one book, and named historians have since debunked it using the real archive transcripts. What those transcripts actually show is a calm, professional cosmonaut working the problem until the very end and signing off with something close to, "I feel excellent, everything's in order." Komarov's remains were badly damaged in the crash and fire. He was given a state funeral in Moscow, cremated, and his ashes were placed in the Kremlin wall in Red Square. One man had died coming home. 4 years later, 3 more would die without ever leaving orbit at all. Chapter 3. The only humans to die in space itself. June 30th, 1971. Cosmonauts Georgy Dobrovolsky, Vladislav Volkov, and Viktor Patsayev are heading home after a record-breaking 23 days aboard Salyut 1, the first space station in history. During separation, 12 small explosive devices are supposed to fire in sequence. Instead, they fire all at once, and the shock jars open a pressure valve that should have stayed shut. That valve opens at an altitude of 168 kilometers, well above the internationally recognized edge of space. The cabin is now open to the vacuum outside it. The 3 men are not wearing pressure suits. There simply wasn't room after engineers squeezed a 3rd seat into a capsule built for 2. Their cabin fully depressurizes in under a minute. Evidence suggests Patsayev tried to manually seal the valve by hand. Even done perfectly, that fix would have taken closer to a minute. It was already far too slow. The capsule itself came down completely undamaged, right on target. When recovery crews opened the hatch, they found all 3 men still strapped into their seats. The cause of death was asphyxiation from the sudden loss of pressure. Investigators found bleeding in the brain and inner ear, caused by dissolved gases boiling out of the blood, the same mechanism that gives divers the bends. Useful consciousness would have been lost within about 30 seconds. All 3 men were given a state funeral, and their ashes were placed in the Kremlin wall near Yuri Gagarin. American astronaut Tom Stafford served as a pallbearer, representing President Nixon. And to this day, these 3 remain the only human beings confirmed to have died above the edge of space itself. After this, Soyuz permanently reverted to carrying only 2 cosmonauts at a time, specifically so there would always be room for pressure suits again. It would be 15 years before another spacecraft failure killed its crew. This time, the entire world would be watching it happen live. Chapter 4. The disaster the whole world watched. January 28, 1986. 73 seconds after launch, a failed rubber seal lets flame burn through the side of the Space Shuttle Challenger's external fuel tank, and the vehicle tears itself apart. But the crew cabin itself does not explode. It separates from the wreckage largely intact, and its own momentum carries it thousands of feet higher before it finally starts to fall. It falls for close to 3 minutes before hitting the ocean at more than 200 miles an hour. That impact alone was completely unsurvivable. Here is the part almost every other video about this gets wrong. NASA's own official finding was that the exact cause of death could not be positively determined, and whether the crew lost consciousness during that fall is possible, but not certain, either way. Some emergency air packs had been manually switched on, and some cockpit switches had been thrown by hand. That is real physical evidence of crew action after the breakup. It still does not settle the question either way. What follows is one of the largest search operations in Navy history, covering hundreds of square miles of ocean. The crew cabin is finally located on the seafloor in early March. Recovery continues for weeks. Remains are identified through dental records using the forensic methods available in 1986. Some remains could never be attributed to one specific person. That unidentifiable portion was cremated and buried together at Arlington National Cemetery, beneath a memorial dedicated the following year. Some crew members are buried there individually. Others rest at their own families' chosen cemeteries, from New Hampshire to Hawaii. And here is the myth we have to correct. A widely shared final transcript of the crew talking calmly as they fell first appeared in a tabloid years later, and it is fabricated. The real last words from the actual flight recorder were just 2, oh. 17 years after Challenger, on the very same kind of vehicle, the story would repeat itself, this time on the way back down instead of the way up. Chapter 5. When it happened again. February 1st, 2003. The Space Shuttle Columbia breaks apart during re-entry, high over Texas, traveling 18 times the speed of sound. Wreckage falls across a corridor stretching more than 200 miles from eastern Texas into Louisiana. Search teams recover more than 80,000 individual pieces of debris. All 7 crew members are positively identified within 2 weeks through DNA testing cross-checked against dental and medical records. A later NASA investigation concluded the accident was not survivable. The first lethal event was a rapid loss of cabin pressure, completed in about 40 seconds, and the crew lost consciousness within seconds of that, before the more violent structural breakup even began. The crew of Columbia is memorialized at the Space Mirror Memorial at Kennedy Space Center, their names added later that same year, alongside every other astronaut the American program has lost. 18 people, 5 disasters spanning almost 40 years, and every single one of them made it back to Earth. Today, they rest at the Kremlin Wall, at Arlington, at West Point, at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific, and in hometowns from New Hampshire to South Carolina. One honest footnote. In 1967, test pilot Michael Adams died when his X-15 rocket plane broke apart at over 80 kilometers. Under the strict definition, he never quite crossed the internationally recognized edge of space, so historians count him separately from the 18. And no, there are no human remains still floating in space. Every person who has ever died flying toward it has eventually been brought home. You may have also heard theories about Soviet cosmonauts who supposedly died and were erased before Gagarin ever flew. Serious historians consider that an unverified myth, not real history, and we've told that entire story, honestly, in another video on this channel. If those 6 erased Soviet cosmonauts shocked you, wait until you see exactly how the USSR pretended they never existed. And subscribe to Mindwired so the next story finds you. If any of this messed with your head a little, well, that's exactly the point. And it only happens because people like you keep showing up. And
hit subscribe right now, Flynn. It costs you nothing, and it's the entire reason Mindwired keeps making videos like this. Subscribe.